Hi folks, this is Richard James DeSocio. I'm on my 2025 tour. I call it the JFK Assassination Tour of Truth. And if you know my work and my videos and my books, you know I believe I accuse Governor Nelson Rockefeller, of assassinating JFK, RFK, ordered Watergate, and the attempted assassination of Gerald Ford. I should say the first attempted assassination of Gerald Ford, maybe the second one, which came like 1 or 2 days later. But I'm here, obviously you can see, obviously I'm here in front of the Kennedy compound. And I do want to talk a little bit about the overarching reasons, the obviously overarching reasons why the Rockefellers have come to kill the Kennedys. But I want to talk a little bit about the Kennedy compound. As you can see, I'm a little off-centered for a reason. I want to show you. Now, this was the home. This was the original Kennedy home. They came here. The family came here. Joseph Kennedy and Rose Kennedy came here in 1926, which was a smaller place. Then they added on to it. It's a triple gable now. And there's 3 Kennedy homes here. There's other buildings. I think there's a swimming pool and garage and thing, but the 3 Kennedy homes here, say 1963, were, very much ensconced in this area. So I'll give you a little history of these buildings and tell you what their status is now. You can hear the ocean crashing behind me. It's not the best day for video, but I'm here. But I want to show you, the reason I'm a little off-centered is, I'm going to tell you why. Hopefully this works. Just bear with me a little bit. There it is. Oh. Right there. Okay, so you can see the perspective there. There's the original family home to the left. And if you go forward, you zoom in a little bit. All right, there it is. That's the home of, that was the home of John Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline Kennedy, Bouvier Kennedy. Sorry. This is kind of a low budget operation. That was their home. That home there with the white chimney, that was the home of John Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy when John Kennedy became Massachusetts Senator Kennedy. They lived there with their children. Now, the home now is, I'll say, pretty much the property of Edward Kennedy Jr., who was a former senator from Connecticut, and his I believe his brother had an office too somewhere, but I can't remember it now. But I believe he lives there now. And what happened when Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy died, the home went to her daughter Carolyn. And then Ted Kennedy bought it. Senator Ted Kennedy bought it. And now his son is residing. Ted Kennedy Jr. is residing there. I believe Ted is the junior, is the older of the 2 brothers. Now, the iconic family home is no longer, any Kennedys live there. It's owned by, it was willed to the Edward Kennedy Foundation for Government Studies, something like that, and it's run out of Harvard University. You can also see, I'm going to position the camera later, I got to move the camera, but you can just see a little bit of what was. Probably not even worth moving it, but You know, I can see it, but I don't think you'd make it out. But you can see just a little corner of what was the home of Robert Kennedy and Ethel Kennedy died within less than a year ago. Apparently, she was pretty out and about up into COVID 2019. She was known to ride around on her golf cart and check out the horticulture. It's a beautiful horticulture out here. I guess she was very conversant with people, friendly. But there was a joke going around town, a running joke, and don't stand in front of the golf cart when you're talking to Ethel Kennedy, because she how do I say it, goes without giving warning. Anyways, ha 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 ha. What? But anyways, okay, I'm going to show you. The trouble is, if you get closer to Robert Kennedy's house, the bank gets higher and you can't see it. It's hard to see. But it's not what you're thinking of. It's not that other stuff in the background. No, it's so close. It's just, you see a slim of it. I see it clearly, but you wouldn't see it. And then I'm going to show you the Shriver House. I'm going to tell you some history there. Ties to the day JFK died. And that had nothing to do with his, probably nothing to do with his assassination, but it is a chapter in American history which too few people know about. We'll talk about that. But I love talking about why the Rockefellers killed the Kennedy, standing in front of, coming face to face with this history here. Basically, it was all about the Kennedys. Two dynasties came to blows. The Rockefeller dynasty and the Kennedy dynasty. The Rockefeller dynasty, maybe more of a financial, industrial dynasty. The Kennedy dynasty, more of a political dynasty, and a dynasty that was showing potential to become a Tammany Hall in Washington. And when Kennedy was elected, he did so. He got the support of the House, full support of Rockefeller. I'm going to give you the overarching reasons why the Rockefellers killed Kennedy. Because the Kennedys were going to destroy the Rockefeller dynasty and put themselves as complete commander of industry, banking, everything. And the Rockefellers knew this, so they acted. That's why these people were successful, because they're not going to surrender to anybody. Don't ever think they were ever rehabilitated in 1911. Don't ever think the Supreme Court changed them in one way. They don't change their character. They just change the way they operate. So they go from secrecy to more secrecy. Okay, here's the big connecting dots and overarching things. What happened in 1960? Governor Nelson Rockefeller, 1958, got elected governor of New York State. Now, this was huge. This was a massive sea change in the course of American history. Why? Because the Rockefellers, if you go back to the first generation, they were what? The robber barons. The ruthless robber barons. Now, barely 40 years later, now they're getting elected to high office and shooting for higher office. If anybody knows anything about Nelson Rockefeller, they know he had a driving ambition to be called Mr. President, and he came awfully close. I'm going to show you how all the dots cannot connect up. So in 1960, Nelson Rockefeller ran 2 years after getting elected. He ran for the Republican primary, but he dropped out early, and I believe he dropped out to put total support behind JFK. First of all, they were business partners. The Rockefellers and Kennedys were at least business partners in the RKO movie theater, which they co-founded. Joe Kennedy was one time a significant movie producer, as well were the Rockefellers. And after all, where's the capital of motion picture today? It's really Rockefeller Center, because all these it's multimedia now. Comcast building, studios own broadcast own studios and everything else. You know what I'm talking about. Our NBC, CBS, and all the, NBC owns Universal, and Time Warner was headquartered there for years. They moved up the street though recently. Paramount is almost called part of Rockefeller. It's in the One Astor Place on It's just off of Times Square, you know. So how Rockefeller Center is not only Radio City Center, it's multimedia center. So when I tell you these things, it's not some crazy theory. All right, now, so JFK, I should say Nelson Rockefeller dropped out to support the Kennedys. He threw the whole house of Rockefeller behind JFK's election. Now, also, the Kennedys and the Rockefellers had a very similar platform in that both, I'll just put it, were progressive. Okay, I'll leave it at that for now. And when JFK got elected, it was almost, the two guys, Rockefeller and Kennedy, skipped into the White House together. That's how charming that victory was to the Rockefellers. But things quickly changed to a point of warfare. And what had happened was, in 62, Governor Rockefeller, ran for and got reelected for governor for a second term, one of 4 terms. This was this was the family who went from the robber barons, ruthless robber barons, now winning high office. So what happened in 62? Kennedy confided in his confidants that he believed Nelson Rockefeller was going to be his top competition to getting reelected. I should say the most significant challenge to his reelection. What had happened in 62, also Nelson Rockefeller got caught taking money out of the Rockefeller Foundation to run his political campaigns. And President Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, was investigating, and they were taking action against Nelson Rockefeller. It's a huge history most people don't know about. Now we got the nexus for murder. And, the Rockefellers beat the Kennedys to the punch. Well, they're ruthless, aren't they? They didn't call them ruthless for no reason. In 64, what happened in 64? I'm giving you overarching motives here. What happened in 64? Nelson Rockefeller was the front-running Republican candidate for the 64 election right up until like the second or third night of the Republican primary. Okay, is this some kind of crazy conspiracy theory? And here's another kicker. November 9th of 1963, what happened? Well, you wouldn't know, but I'm going to tell you. Governor Nelson Rockefeller announced his candidacy for the White House 13 days before Kennedy was assassinated. So that should have made him a person of obvious motive to kill the Kennedys or to kill JFK. Because you would say, who would be the people with the obvious motive? Well, Lyndon Johnson, and who else? Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, yeah, all right, I'll give you that one. And who else? Nelson Rockefeller. If Kennedy had not died, he would have been, it would look like he would have been squared off with Nelson Rockefeller. Okay, very close. Barry Goldwater grabbed the prize from Nelson Rockefeller. And, Barry Goldwater represented the right wing of the Republican Party, which Nelson Rockefeller is way too progressive for that group. Now, these are the overarching motives here. Now, what happened in 68? Bobby was seeking the Democratic nomination, and he would have won that slam down, and a high probability of becoming president, because that was an open year, no incumbent. Unless you wanted to consider a former vice president being an incumbent. And actually, if you read my book, I got a new book coming out. I believe the plot to kill JFK started with a plot to kill Richard Nixon, but that's a long story. I don't want to get into that now. But it ties in what I'm going to tell you. So who was the leading? So Robert Kennedy had a huge chance of becoming president of the United States. Now, Lyndon Johnson he chose not to run and said, I will not run. Even if my party drafts me, I will not run. And so it was an open year. And Johnson and not Rockefeller, if you know the history, they met 2 or 3 months before Robert Kennedy was assassinated. They met in the White House, supposedly a late night meeting dinner. And among other topics, Johnson asked Rockefeller again to run as a Democrat, run as a president as a Democrat. Years later, somebody asked Nelson Rockefeller why he never got elected president. He says, well, because I was in the wrong party. Probably some truth to that. But he would not have thought, Nelson Rockefeller was a Republican to the bone, but a progressive one. But not as progressive as the Kennedy, not as progressive as JFK. So I could go on and on and on and more. So obviously 68. Now the Rockefellers couldn't let RFK in the White House after they killed JFK. Bobby would have found that truth out and sent the Rockefellers would have definitely sent them to the gallows for their guilt. So they couldn't let that happen. They had to pull all stops in and step in, and they shot him when he was a senator. He ran as Senator Robert Kennedy when he ran for the White House. He won the candidacy. He ran the Senate in New York State. I remember when Robert Kennedy, when he was campaigning for Senator in New York State, came to St. Mary's School in Auburn, New York. I was in 20 feet. I saw him in the flesh. And I also shook hands with Nelson Rockefeller, 1966, when he was on the stump. Of course, I didn't realize then he had shot Kennedy. You know what impressed me most about Nelson Rockefeller? How tiny he was. He was small, tiny. But that was tiny in stature, not power and wealth and greed. Okay, now let's go forward. So in 68, just to sum up, Nixon, the former vice president, won the primary, and the three front runners were Ronald Reagan, Nelson Rockefeller, and Nixon, and Nixon won the primary. Now let's go to Watergate. No, let's go to 72. Now we get into Watergate. Well, what happened in Watergate? Well, you know the story. Tell me about Watergate. Right? President Nixon resigned. Okay, well, there's more to that story than just that. Let's finish the whole story here. Nelson Rockefeller was appointed and confirmed as vice president. Ding! You see how that's add up? And he was, of course, not elected. He was appointed and confirmed by Congress and the House of Representatives. Shows you how crooked our government is. And he was confirmed. This was like, you had the big Watergate hearing in Washington, which led to a possible impeachment. I don't think Richard Nixon resigned before the impeachment vote was taken. But the Senate investigated that Watergate, and if you know anything about Watergate, you know that Standard Oil bankrolled the Watergate break-in. The burglars who were caught, like Hunt and McCord and Liddy, and then they had the Miami guys from Miami, like Frank Sturgis and a few other names there. They had these stacks of $100 bills that were coming from Standard Oil, and that per Watergate hearing. I'm not making this up. I say Standard Oil, but by 1962 the name was changed to Exxon, but same thing, owned by the Rockefellers. That was the company they founded. So when Nelson Rockefeller come up for his confirmation hearing, here's the grandson of the founder of Standard Oil, and Standard Oil just got accused of bankrolling the Watergate break-in. And these senators and congressmen, they wave, Mr. Rockefeller. Go right through. They asked him a couple softball questions. And Nelson Rockefeller reminded all the senators, he goes, I have 3,500 shares of Standard Oil stocks. Well, Exxon. Oh, wasn't that a reminder? Nope. That's how corrupt our government is. That's why there's been so many failed investigations out of Washington. Now they got this dog and pony show going in Washington. They're looking at these so-called declassified documents. How many documents are there, folks? How many documents you got to see to know this is... You're being lied to, okay? I'm telling you the story. All right? The Rockefellers and Kennedys, it was dynastic warfare. That's what it was about. Those documents in Washington are all typewritten documents that somebody was writing a novel. They wrote that documents up to throw everybody off the trail, the true trail. So, anyways, where was I? Well, the story's not done yet. Who appointed Nelson Rockefeller vice president? Well, President Gerald Ford, he was appointed too. He was appointed by Richard Nixon. So you got a president and vice president both appointed. Now keep in mind, when Nelson Rockefeller was plotting to kill JFK, Richard Nixon was living in his co-op on 812 Fifth Avenue, corner of 62nd Street, in the summer of 1963, when Nelson Rockefeller was plotting to kill JFK. Yeah. And don't forget, Gerald Ford was a Warren commissioner, one of the 7 ranking members who, gave the Rockefellers gave them a pass. Well, this new book I'm coming up is going to be 1,000 pages, and believe me, I got to cut stuff out. That's how big the story has grown. I'll get you all the details, a lot more details you might want to know. I'm still not done with this story yet. So here's President Ford now. He's president. He's got his vice president. How long was he? Okay, what happened out in California? Squeaky Fromm, pulled a loaded gun, 45 automatic. He only had it a few inches from President Ford's heart, and failed to pull the trigger. A loaded gun, a loaded 45. That would have ended Ford right there and then. All right. Okay. Nelson Rockefeller would have been president. Okay. Need I tell you any more? And I believe that Oswald, the accused assassin of JFK, and Sirhan, the accused assassin of Robert Kennedy, and Squeaky Fromm were all part of a massive MK Ultra program hatched by the Rockefellers to kill primarily for political assassination. And I believe, again, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to discuss it in my book, they were after Richard Nixon. And you'll see in my book the reasons why my theory, I believe, is correct. Obviously, I believe it's correct. It is correct. They were Manchurian candidates. It was a big blacked out program, super secret program. I spent a lot of time in Montreal at the Allen Institute. Everything I learn every day just ties to the Rockefellers and MK Ultra. So there was a second attempt assassination against Gerald Ford. I'm sorry, against President Ford. This came a couple days later by an FBI informant. It was another female. And by then, the Secret Service decided to do their job, and they backed the crowds up. They had the crowds backed up about 50 feet. And I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, though, but she fired 2 shots at Gerald Ford and missed from across the street. She was wrestled to the ground by a former Marine. And that's it. So Nelson Rockefeller never got his dream of being called Mr. President, but he caused a lot of bloodshed. But still, he saved his family dynasty from the horrors of what the Kennedys were about to do to them. And in my book, I'm going to discuss more and more what exactly I'm talking about. And one of the primary targets of the Kennedys was Aramco, the biggest treasure trove in the nation. I'm talking here about the Saudi Peninsula. I'm sorry, not the Saudi, the Arabian Peninsula. Sometimes it's called Saudi Arabia. The Arabian Peninsula was awash with oil. The Rockefellers had the keys to that treasure trove. There's a big history there with the Rockefellers. And I go into it in my book, so you'll see a better understanding what I'm trying to tell you here. But anyways, I'm going to sum this up now. And maybe I'll just show you one more house here. Yeah. There it is. I just want to show you that. It's in Kennedy, next door neighbor to the Kennedys. It's a Wilson home. They owned, last I knew it was the Wilson home. They owned some mall stores like the Gap. And I just want to show you right there. You see how close it is? That was the home of Robert Kennedy and Ethel Kennedy. And, you know, there are 11 children. And I don't know anything about who lives there now or who owns it. But it's so close, it's hard to see one, or even hard to see them as two separate buildings. But that's it right there. And actually, the little part of that didn't exist in that like little bay window there didn't exist in 1963, because I've seen pictures from that date. So it was added on years later. I just wanted you to check that out.